to use this nullable int or int underscore, right? So you know what is the meaning of this, right? If by default this integer, they are which type? Not null or null type, guys? Integer is a primitive type or reference type?
Primitive.
Sorry?
Primitive.
Primitive. Can you store by default any null value in that integer data type?
No. Not by default.
No. But if you create a class type or if you create a string data type, can you store null value in that variable?
Yep.
Yes. Because reference type, the default value is null. Primitive type, the default value is not null. So in this case, based on the data type, it might be 0. It might be, if you are taking some Boolean type, then the default value is going to be false. For numeric data type, the default value is going to be 0. So by default, if you want to make this as nullable type in the database, then you have to use this nullable or this integer question mark, right? Now, if you check, then these are created as the null data type. Clear? Clear, guys?
Okay.
Any question from anyone related to this inverse property? Any question from anyone? Okay.
No.
Okay, fine. So next, what we are going to discuss, we are going to discuss the not mapped attribute. So not mapped attribute means what? This attribute can be applied to one or more properties of an entity, right? So what is the use of this attribute? Let us discuss. So currently, if you see, I'm having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 properties which are created here as columns, right? So by default, for each property which is having the getter and setter accessor, it will create a corresponding database column, right? That means if you look at this course entity, course ID, description, online teacher ID, offline teacher ID, each entity having getter and setter accessor, right? I'm not considering this what I can say, this reference type, right? Reference type I'm not considering because they are not going to be created as a database column, right? So whatever the integer string, right? The type means the type which can hold the value directly, right? String is a reference type, but it can hold a value. Teacher, it's a reference type, but it can hold the reference address, not the value. So whichever data type, right, which can hold the data, right, for those data type, if that data type variable or data type property having both get and set accessor, then by default it will create a column in the database. Now what is your requirement? You want to create an entity, and you want to create an entity, and that entity having you can consider 10 properties are there, 15 properties are there, but you don't want to create all the properties as a corresponding column, right? You want to ignore few properties while generating the database column, right? Or it might be the case that you are having multiple entities, right? Multiple domain classes, and you want to make sure that this is one of the domain class. For this domain class, I don't want to create any corresponding database table. Then in that case, you need to use the not mapped attribute. Whichever model class you don't want to create as a database column, you need to decorate that model class with not mapped attribute. And if you are having one entity class or model class, you don't want few properties to be created as database column in the database, then you need to decorate those properties with not mapped attributes. So once you make the once you decorate one entity, any entity or any properties as not mapped, then they will not take part in database mapping. If they are not taking as part of database mapping, then the corresponding database table or the corresponding column will not be generated for those entity or for those properties, right? So with this keep in mind, let us understand this with an example. So what I'm going to do, let me remove this student, these things. Let me go to our student entity. So this is my student entity. So I'm going to change the student entity. So now you can see I'm having two students. One is student online and another entity is student offline. If you see the student online, the ID is student online ID, because by default you need one property whose name should be ID or entity name plus ID. In this case, I'm going with entity name plus ID, first name, last name, and one property called registration number. And another entity student offline, and the structure is going to be same: student offline ID, first name, last name, and also registration number. But the thing that you need to remember, here I have applied this NotMapped attribute with the registration number property, and here I have applied the NotMapped attribute with the student offline entity. So before understanding, let me go to the definition of this. What this definition says. So it's a class which is inherited from the attribute class. That means we can decorate this, or we can use this class as an attribute. And what the definition says denotes that a property or class should be excluded from database mapping. That means what? If you want to exclude a property from database mapping, then use this attribute. If you want to exclude a class from database mapping, then you should decorate that class with this NotMapped attribute. And this class only having a single constructor, or you can say a parameterless constructor, and you do not need to do anything special. You just need to decorate the class or property with this NotMapped attribute, and that is what I'm doing here. I'm decorating this registration number with NotMapped attribute and decorating this student offline with NotMapped attribute. That means what? Now when the entity framework are going to generate the corresponding database, then he will check this entity class, right? If it is registered in the context class, then it will generate a database table for this name, student online, right? And it will create a column for these three properties, but it will not create a column for this property. And again, he is finding this NotMapped attribute means you cannot now you cannot use the student attribute, right? Now I remove this thing, right? Let me show you the things practically. So I remove this thing, right? Let me modify the context class. Now if you go to the context class, now what I'm doing, I'm just registering these two things, right? Currently my intention is I want to create a student online as a database table, but I don't want to make this student offline as a database table. So for that you have two options. You have to remove this one, offline student. So which one you want? You don't want student offline. So you can say student offline. But by default, or due to some problem, you forgot to remove this statement. As you forgot to remove this statement, right? When you run the application, then it is going to generate two database tables, right? It is going to generate two database tables. One database table for student online, another database table for student offline, right? And in this case, you will see in student online, it is going to generate the table with three properties, right? Okay, let me modify the main method also. So in the main method, what I'm going to do, I'm just creating one student online, and I'm just adding that student online entity to the database, right? With the changes, now let me run the application code. And with this run, right, you will see two database tables are going to be created in the database. One database table with three columns, because in that table registration number is removed, and another database table with a 4 column, because we have not applied any kind of attributes, right? So in this case, student online, you will see student online ID, first name and last name. So student online, this property is removed. Now for student offline, we have not applied any kind of, so by default everything is going to be created. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just removing this one, and I know that I'm not going to generate any database column for the student offline, so I just decorate that entity, or you can say I decorate that model class with NotMapped attribute. So you have decorated this one, but you have not commented this one. So what will happen? So now when the database, when entity framework is going to generate a database based on this model class, it will check this class, it find that is find student entity, And when it is going to generate the corresponding database for student offline, then he will see that student offline is mapped with this not mapped attribute, right? Decorate with this not mapped attribute. So he is going to throw one exception saying you cannot create a corresponding database table for this entity, right? Please review this, right? Let me run the application and show you the things practically. So it should throw. So what error message it is throwing? The type EF code first demo.student offline was not marked. Check that the type has not been explicitly excluded by using the ignore method. This ignore method is basically used with Fluent API, and this not mapped attribute basically used with data annotation. In Fluent API, we are going to use ignore method, right? What Fluent API we are going to discuss next. But with the not mapped attribute, right, verify that type was defined as a class, is not a primitive or generic, and does not inherit from entity object. So what basically it is saying, now please verify the student offline, which might be decorated with the ignore method or not mapped attribute. So now if you go to the student entity, you will see that yes, this is decorated with not mapped. Now you need to take the decision whether you want to create the entity. Now you need to take the decision whether you want to create the corresponding database table for this entity or not. If you want to take the, if you take the decision that yes, I want to create an entity, I want to create the database table for this entity, then you need to comment this line. And if you do not want to create the corresponding database table for this entity, right, then you simply need to comment here, right? So once you comment these things, right, now run the application again, and this time you will not get any kind of error, and this time it is going to generate a single database table in the database, right? Now if you go to the database, refresh the database, and this time you will not find two database table, you will find only student online. And again in the student online you will see only the three properties, and it is going to ignore this registration number. Guys, understand what is the use of a not mapped attribute?
Yes.
Right. And one more point and one more thing that I need to explain is, so entity framework will generate a database column if it is having both getter and setter accessor. Now if you check, so right, each property that what I am mentioning here, all the properties having get and set accessor or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
Right. Now if you have any property which doesn't have the get accessor or set accessor, then for that property entity framework is not going to generate the database column. Right. Now if you check this one, student ID, it is a property having both get set, first name last name also having the get and set accessor. For this registration number, do you have set accessor?
No.
For this roll number, do you have the get accessor?
No.
So now if you run the application, then it is going to generate a three column for this student online entity. It will not generate columns for these two registration number and roll number property. So the point that you need to remember, if you do not have the get and set accessor for a property, then entity framework will not going to generate the corresponding database column. So if you want to ignore a property, right, then you have two options. Either you can decorate the attribute with get, decorate the attribute with a, or decorate the property with not mapped attribute. Else you have other option also, and that option is you have to. And if you do not have the get and set accessor, then also it is going to ignore from database map. Right. So with these changes, now if you run the application, currently this 4 are, so let me add some few properties so you can see the difference. Now what I'm trying to do, I'm just adding this branch because currently the table only having this. Right. Now if you run the application, then you will see these 4 properties. You will not see this registration number and the roll number in the corresponding database table. So let me run the application. The application is running. Let's wait for a few seconds, because every time we are changing the database schema, it is going to drop the database and create the database again. See, you are having only those 4 properties, but it is not having this registration number and a roll number property. So in this way also, you can ignore a column, a property from database map. Clear, guys? Any
Yes.
question by anyone? Okay. The next attribute what we are going to discuss is the required attribute, right? If anyone working with the MVC application or web API application, then they might know the use of a required attribute. Can anybody tell me who have experience on MVC or MVC application or web API application, what is the use of this required attribute? So we are using something called a data annotation in our MVC application or web API application. What is the meaning of this required attribute? So if you are
The
having
field
one,
cannot be
yeah,
empty.
tell me. Sorry, tell me.
So I was saying the field can't be empty when you say that it's required.
Exactly. So basically, if you are having some text boxes, first name, last name text boxes, and if that UI, if that text box is mapped with one model, and if in the model property there is a property called first name, there is a property called last name, and if you decorate that property with required attribute, then from the UI, if the user doesn't enter anything and press the button, submit button, save button, whatever may be, then at that time you will get some kind of a error that this field is this is a required field, right? The same thing is also applicable here, right? The required data annotation attribute basically is a validation attribute, and this attribute can be applied to one or more properties of an entity class. If we applied the required attribute to a property, then the entity framework will create a not null column for that property in the database, right? Currently, if you check the first name, last name, and the branch, right? These are created on the string data type. And if you check the database, then they are created as a null column, right? Now my requirement is I don't want to accept null value for this first name column. I don't want to accept null value for the last name column. I want to accept null value for the branch column. If you do not want to accept the null value for a particular string column, right? By default, if you are taking integer, they are not null. But if you are taking any string type, right, then they are by default going to be null value. And if you do not want to accept null value, then what you need to do is you need to decorate the particular property with the required attribute. And once you decorate the attribute with the required attribute, then that attribute, that required attribute will mark that column as a not null column in the database. And whenever you are trying to insert some value, and if you pass the null value or if you pass the empty string, right, then in that case it is going to throw you some kind of a error, right? So let us understand. So you can see there are the signature is like this. It is having a one constructor which is a parameterless constructor, right? That means it doesn't take any parameter, and the one property is there that is allow empty string, and there is another method that is override method called isValid, right? So this is isValid method. If you want to override this required attribute and you want to provide your own implementation, then you need to use this one, but this is not required in the case of entity framework. Allow empty string means what? Now see, so can anybody tell me one thing, the difference between null and a empty string? Both are going to be same or both are going to be different?
Different.
Different. What is the difference between them?
Difference is an empty string. It is a string, but it doesn't have anything in there. While null means that it's nothing.
Exactly. Null means there is nothing. Empty string means there is a value and that value is empty, right? But people are getting confused. Both are same, but both are in reality they are not same. Null means what? See, Null means, for example, null means there is nothing. Nothing means you do not have anything. Empty means you have something. Something that might be empty, but you have something. Here you have the thing, but here you do not have the thing, right? So with this, keep in mind. Let me tell you one thing, right? If see, whenever you decorate one attribute with the, whenever you decorate one property with the required attribute, by default it is not going to accept. By default, it is not going to accept null and empty. Later, if you want to accept the empty string, then you need to use this allow empty string property of the required attribute. And in this case, there are the value might be true or false. If you set this value to true, then it will accept empty value. And if you set this value to false, then it will not accept empty value. And by default, the value of this property is going to be false. So by default, it will not accept empty string. Let us understand this with one example, right? So this is my student class. So I modify the student entity like this. So in this case, you can see this is the column. This is my name. This is my address. This is my roll number. So if you run the application, then this will be created as null or not null, guys. So in this case, this will be created as not null. Why? Because primitive data type, right, integer, they cannot hold the null value. So whichever data type holds the null value, for that data type, it is going to create a nullable column. If the data type what you mentioned is unable to hold the null value, then for that column, right, for that data type, the corresponding column what generated in the database, they are going to hold the not null value, right? So in this case, for student ID, it is going to give 100 guys. Right. So in this case, for student ID, it is going to generate not null. Name, address, it is going to generate null, and for roll number, it is going to generate not null. Let me register this in my context class. Right, so I have registered this one, and here I need to modify this class also. Right. So I'm just creating one student, adding the student, and save service. Right. So now run the application. Then you will see that two columns, integer type property columns, right, are going to be created as not null column, and string types are going to be created as null. Right now, if you refresh the tables folder, then you will see that students database table, and in this students database table, you can see student ID not null, roll number not null, name null, and address is null. Clear, guys? This is the default convention, right? Now, what is my requirement? How to make the name column as not null column, right? So now what my requirement is, I don't want to accept null value on the name column. So what I need to do is, I need to decorate this name column with the required attribute, right? So if you know, so there is a required attribute, and this is available in a different namespace using system dot component model dot data annotations, right? So now with this value, this field becomes not null, right? So in your application, in .NET application, you can store null value on this column, but while it is inserting the data into the database, it will throw you kind of an exception, right? So currently the validation is going to be hard, right? If you go to the definition, then you will see that it is not inherited from the attribute class, it is inherited from the validation attribute class. So now if you go to the validation, then that validation attribute is inherited from the attribute class. So the point that you need to remember is, once you mark this as required, not only it will make that column, as not null in the database, but also it will do the validation, right? If it will do the validation means, if you are inserting if you are storing some data which is null or empty, then in that case it will throw some kind of a exception in your application, right? Let me put this thing side. So once you make this thing, go to this. So you can see now name is from there. So that is fine. But what my intention is, I want to store some what I want to store. I want to store some null value, and to make sure the database to make sure the entry mark is going to throw some error, right? So in this case, I just decorate this name attribute, name property with the required attribute, and here I'm not passing any value. So if I'm not passing any value, then can anybody tell me what is the default value of name? Guys, this student having these properties, if I'm not storing, in this case, I'm not storing any value in the name property, then what should be the default value of name? Guys,
Zero length string.
sorry, what? Zero. Why
Zero-
zero length?
Zero
Why zero
length
length
string.
string? Why zero length string? What is the default value of string data type?
Null.
Null. Then it should store null. Now, then why zero length will come into the picture?
Well, you're saying not null. Ah, no, sorry, it's a comment. Sorry. I thought it not null. No, it's okay. I saw it as it is a comment. Sorry, the not null is a comment.
Right. So in this case, if you are not storing, see, in this case roll number. If I am not putting that roll number column here, then what it will store by default in that property? What is the default value of an integer? The default value of an integer is 0, so it will put 0. So in this case, string data type, default value of string is null. So if you are not assigning anything, then by default null is going to be stored. So in this case, if you are getting confused, let me add name equals to null. Is that fine? So now I'm storing null in the name property, some value on the address, some value on the roll number, and we do not need to pass anything on the student ID, because it is going to be generated as an identity column, and identity column means automatically database is going to generate the value. So as we are passing null on the name property, and as we decorated this attribute with the required attribute, so when you run the application, then it will throw you some exception, right? Let me run the application. Right. So what application it is, what error it is saying? DB entry validation exception. Validation failed for one or more entities. See entity validation property for more details, right? So if you go see entity validation error, right? So we can see name is student entity type. Okay.
Down there, first, no? Where you have the original values with the next, is that one?
Yes. Right. So basically you will get this DB entry validation error, right? And the reason for this is this null column. Right now, if you go to the database and if you refresh this thing, then you will see that name property is now as a not null column, right? So you can see not null, but address is still null, name is not null. So this is the use of a required attribute. If you mark this required attribute as a not null column, if you mark this, if you apply, if you decorate any property with this required attribute, then it will mark that corresponding database column as a not null column. Now what is my requirement? I don't want to store null. Now I'm trying to store empty. Even though I'm trying to store empty value, again it is going to throw me some exception. The same DB entry, DB validation entry exception, right? And why? Now why I'm getting this exception? Because by default this required attribute will not allow null and empty. Now what is my requirement? I don't want to allow null value, but I want to allow what? I want to allow empty string. Then what you need to do? there is a property called allow empty string, and you need to set this value to true. Once you set this allow empty string to true, then what it will do? It will mark that database column as not null, right? But it will allow you to store the empty value. Right now, if you run the application, then you will not get any kind of a exception. This time empty is accepted and the empty value is going to be stored into the database. You can see student added. Clear, guys? Clear, guys?
Yes,
sir.
And in the database, you will see the name column like this. Okay. Whenever you store empty, then you will see empty like this in the database. Any question from anyone? Yes or no, guys?
no.
No.
Okay. So the next attribute what we are going to discuss is MaxLength and MinLength. So as the name itself saying, give me 1 minute, guys. Right. So the next attribute what we are going to discuss is MaxLength and MinLength attribute. So as the name says, if you want to set, right, the minimum length of a property or the maximum length of a property for the validation purpose, then you need to use this MaxLength and MinLength data annotation attribute. Using MaxLength data annotation attribute, you can specify a length, and if the user entering some number of characters more than that length, then it is going to give you some kind of an exception. Similarly, if you decorate any property with the MinLength attribute, right, then if the user entering some value less than the minimum length what you specified using the MinLength attribute, then also it is going to throw you some kind of an error. And this MinLength attribute and MaxLength attribute can be applied on string data type or byte array data type, right? So if you are using the string or byte array properties, then entity framework will set the size, right, by default, right? By default, if you go to the, okay, let me give you the default example, then I will show you this thing practically, right? So this is my student entity, right? So this is my student entity. This is my string data type, and this is my string data type, and this is a byte array. For the string data type, what database column it is going to generate? It is going to generate n marker of max, right? For string data type, the column size in the database is going to be n marker of max, and for byte data type, what should be the name? Var binary. Exactly, I just need to check var binary, right? For the byte array, the data type is going to be var binary. So by default, if you create a string type property or byte array kind of type properties, then by default they are going to be created in the database with the maximum size. For string, the data type is going to be in marker. For byte, the data type is going to be var binary. So in this case, okay, name address, right? Let me modify the main method so that we should not get the exception, right? So this is the first name, last name. So in this case, you can see this is my student ID, first name, last name photo, and here I'm just entering first name, last name, right? I'm not entering the photo because in the case of a byte array, you need to take the photo from the UI, you need to convert that photo to byte array, and once you convert, then that array you need to store in the database. So in this case, we do not have such facility, right? We do not have that UI kind of facility where we can upload one image and we can download that image and we can convert that image into byte array and store into the database. But for that, you need to use byte array, right? So in this case, once you run the application, then you will see that the string data type are going to be created as NVarchar maximum with the maximum size, and the byte array is going to be created as a var binary of maximum length. Right now, if you verify the database, let me refresh the table. Right, so you can see NVarchar of max, NVarchar of max, and var binary of max. So this is the maximum length of what the entity property. Now if you are you know that the first name or any property you created, you know that property length is not going to be more than 10 character. Then if property length is not going to be more than 10 character, then why should I use maximum? If I'm taking maximum, then maximum number of space will be allocated, which is going to be a waste of time. For example, if you know in data type we have discussed different integral data type. We are byte, we have integer, we have short. If I'm storing a small value which can be stored inside the byte data type, then why I'm going to use integer? If I'm putting that value inside byte data type, then 1 byte of memory space is going to be allocated. If I'm putting the same value in an integer, then 4 bytes of memory space is going to be allocated. So in the same way, if you know that my data, what I am going to store, that data can be stored within the size of 10 character, then why I'm going to use the maximum? Why I'm going to use 100,000 like this? I should use NVarchar of 10, right? And that is possible by using the MaxLength attribute, right? So if you decorate any character, if you decorate any data type with the maximum length attribute, then that maximum, using that maximum length attribute, you need to specify a length, and that value what you specify is going to be the size of the data type in the database. But guys, remember, if you use the MinLength attribute, then there is nothing going to happen in the database. In the case of a MinLength, the size is going to be maximum, but the validation will be happen in the database. Right, the validation will be happen in the database, but the size is going to be the size is not going to be changed. So the point that you need to remember, MaxLength attribute set the size of the database column and provide client-side validation. So set the size of the database column and provide the client-side validation. Now, if you use the MaxLength at the MinLength attribute, then it will not set the size of the database. It will only provide the client-side validation. In this case, size will be clear. So if you use MaxLength attribute on a property, then it will set the size of the database column. Suppose if you set the MaxLength size as 50, then it will set the size of the database column as 50, and also provide the client-side validation. Client-side validation means if you enter the value which is greater than 50, then it will throw you some kind of a exception. MinLength means suppose you set the MinLength as 5, then in that case it will provide the client-side validation. Means what? Now if you are entering the value less than 5 character, then it will give you some exception. But in this case, the data type size will be the maximum size. So that is the point that you need to remember. It is setting the size of the database column validation. In this case, only validation size will be max. Clear?
Yes.
Right. So let us understand this with an example. Right. So now, if you see, this is the example where I'm setting the first name, maximum length is 50, last name I'm applying minimum length is 5. So in this case, in the database, first name column size will be 50, but what should be the last name column size? Can anybody tell me? For this one, what should be the data type? NVarchar of what?
50.
50.
And in this case, what should be the size? NVarchar of
Max.
Max.
Right? So this is the point that you need to remember, right? So with this change, right? So here we can see 5 and 4 right now. Now I'm entering the value Pranay first name. Is it greater than 50? This value is greater than 50 character? Yes or no?
No.
So there is no issue for the first name property. For the last name, I'm passing Raut. Raut is how many characters? 4 characters. And what is the minimum length we have set? 5.
5.
So in this case, it should throw me one exception. Right? Let me run the application. Right? So in this case, you can see we are getting the client side validation exception. Now, if you verify the database, then you will see that the first name is 50 and the last name is maximum, right? So in the database side, if you enter the last name as a 4 character, then there is no issue, right? If you create one insert statement and here you enter the first name as a 10 character, last name as a 3 character, then you will not get any kind of issue, because here it is only going to check the maximum size. If the size, whatever the value you are entering, if less than the size what you specify, there is no issue. But here in the .NET side, right, not only the database schema it is defined, but also it is providing you the validations, right? Validation means before storing the data into the database, right, based on the attribute, it will check whether the data what you are trying to enter is passed the validation process or not. If validation is success, then only it is going to enter the data into the database. So in this case, the validation failed, right? And this is the reason why we are getting this error. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right. So now, how we can set both maximum length and minimum length attribute in a single property? Is this possible? Yes, it is possible. For that purpose, what we need to do is we need to decorate the entity with both the attribute, right? So you have to decorate the maximum length as well as minimum length. So now maximum length is 10 character, minimum length is 5 character for the first name property. So in the database, based on the max length value, it will create the database column size. So in the database, the first name column size is going to be 10. But while entering the data, it will check if the value what you are passing is passed this validation process or not. If the value that what you are setting for the first name property is greater than 5 character, greater than equals to 5 character, or less than equals to 10 character or not. If the validation pass, then that is fine. It will insert the data into the database. If validation failed, then it will give you the error, right? So now let me right. So in this case, what I'm trying to do, Pranay Kumar. So now the number of a character is in between is greater than 5. The number of a character is greater than 5. Minimum length is 5. Is the number of a character is greater than 5? Condition satisfied. What is the maximum? Maximum 10. Is the number of a character less than or equals to 10? No. In this case, we are having more number of a character: 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. That means if you try to run this application, now you will get an DB validation exception, because the validation failed in this case based on the maximum length of what you specified, right? So validation failed. And in this case, the validation failed because of the maximum length. Now, if you go to the database, then you will see that it is set the first name property as a embarker of 10 and the last name as embarker of max, because we have not specified anything in the last name property. So by default, it is going to be embarker of max. Clear, guys? How to apply both attributes?
Yes.
All right. Any question from anyone? Okay.
No.
So next, what we are going to discuss is string length attribute. So this is similar to your max and min length attribute. If you remember, in the case, suppose if you want to apply, suppose you want to apply both minimum and the maximum length, then what you need to do, you need to basically use both max length and the min length. So two attributes I'm going to use, and the two validation process is going to be happen. It is going to check the minimum, it is going to check the maximum. But instead of using max length and the min length, right, what I can do is I can use string length attribute. And using string length attribute, right, as you can see in string length, it is taking having one constructor which is taking the maximum length. That means what? The maximum length value is mandatory. Minimum, it is optional. If you want, you can set the minimum length, and if you do not want to set the minimum length, then you can simply ignore this. Let us first understand this string length and what this string length attribute. Then we will understand the difference between string length and the maximum length attribute what we discussed, right? So now you have understand this max length attribute, and now let us try to understand this string length attribute. So in this case, you can see this is my student ID. This is going to be my integer. For integer parameter, you do not need to define the length because integer is a fixed size, right? And in max length, I'm applying this max length attribute with the first name and applying the string length attribute with the last. So in this case, in both the cases, the things are going to be same. So it is going to generate varchar of size 10 for first name, also going to generate varchar of size 10 in the database, right? So both are going to behave in the same manner, right? Let me modify the model class. Sorry, let me modify the main method of the program class. So here I'm trying to insert one code, right? Let me run the application. Give me 1 minute, guys. So you can see one student is added. Now, if you go and verify the database, then you will see that both are going to be the same, right? So in this case, first name is varchar 10, last name is varchar of 10, right? That is fine. So the behavior, it is going to be same. Right now, what is my requirement? I want to set both min and max length property, right? That is also fine. You know how to do this thing, right? So suppose you want to set the minimum and the maximum length, then what you need to do? Using a max length and min length, I can set the value like this. So in this case, in the database, it is going to generate the first name column with the size 10. But while entering the data, both the validation is going to be checked by entity framework. Entity framework will check whether the first name value what we are entering is less than is greater than equals to 5 character, or less than equals to, and less than equals to 10 character. If validation success, then that is fine. Again, the same thing is going to be done by the string length attribute. So in this case, this 10 is nothing but the constructor parameter, which is nothing but the maximum length attribute, maximum length property value. So in the database, it is also going to generate the column with the size 10, and also entity framework is going to do the validation the way it is performing with the max length and the min length attribute. So it is also going to check the minimum length value and the maximum length value before the generating the insert statement and sending that insert statement to the database for execution. And if the validation is successful, then it is going to generate the data, right? So now if you run the application, right, then what will happen? Now for the last name property value, it is going to throw you the error. Why? Now because if you see the what is the size of the last name? Last name minimum length is 5, and what is the value we are passing? We are passing 4 character. So the validation failed, so we are getting this error. So whatever the minimum length and the maximum length do independently, Both the things we can achieve using the string length attribute. Clear, guys? Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now what I'm going to do, instead of Pranay, I'm just making this as a 5 characters. Now if you run the application, then you will see didn't add it. Right. That is fine. Now the question is, what is the difference between these two? Right. So from entity framework point of view, we will not find any kind of a differences, but there is some differences. What is the difference? Let us try to understand. Go to the definition of a max length attribute. What this max length attribute saying, specifies the maximum length of array or string data allowed in a property. Right. Let me open this one. Let me go to the string length attribute definition. Specifies the minimum and the maximum length of a characters that are allowed in a data frame. Okay. So difference specifies the maximum of string data that allowed in a property, and here specific minimum maximum length of a character data allowed in a data frame. Means what? From there is no difference actually from the entity framework point of view, but there are some difference. What is the difference? Max length data annotation attribute is used for the entity framework to decide how large to make a string value field when it creates the database. According to MSDN, max length specifies the maximum length of array or string data allowed in the property. Same thing, string length is a data annotation attribute that will be used for validation of user input. According to MSDN, string length specifies the minimum and the maximum length of characters, right, that are allowed in a database. So if your intention is data validation, then use string length, and if your intention is to decide the database table column length, then use max attribute, right? You will not find any differences when you are using both attributes with entity framework code first approach. You will see the differences when you are working with MVC or web API application to validate the model data, right? So in this case, there is no difference from entity framework point of view. If you use max length or string length, there is no difference, but there is a difference when you are working with your MVC application. You want to provide some kind of validation. Then if validation is your intention, you do not want to generate any kind of a database column, all these things. If you only want to provide some kind of a validation to your model properties, then you need to use string length. And if you want to decide, yeah, based on my max length attribute value, the database column length should be decided in the database, then you need to use your max length attribute. So if you are working with MVC application with the database first approach, then you need to use string length attribute. If you are using, right, if you are using entity framework model first approach to generate the database, all these things, right? If you want to generate the database column length and then you want to provide the validation, then you need to use max length, right? So this is the thing that you need to understand. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right. So there
Yes.
actually, technically speaking, there is no differences between them. But yes, if what is your intention, you want to provide validation only, then you need to use string. If your intention is validation plus you want to decide the length in the database, right, then you need to use max length. But string length is also going to provide the validation, as well as it is also going to decide the size of the database column in the database. But this is in the case of entity framework. But if you are developing one web application, and when the user enters some data and you want to provide validation to the user enter data, right, each model state is valid and all these things, right, then in that case you need to use string, because the validation is your intention. The intention is not to create the data set, the database column size. Then in that case, you need to use string. But the example, what we are doing right now, we are just creating the database schema and all these things. For that purpose, you need to use max length. Clear?
Yes.
So Next one is database generated attribute, right? This is not, this is also one of the important attribute. Let us try to understand what is this database generated attribute. So as we already discussed for the key column, right? Suppose for the key column, so in this case, this is my key column. The entity framework generates the primary key with identity. What is the identity seed and increment value? 1, 1, right? That means the table data, the column data is going to be generated automatically by the database, right? When we perform some kind of an insert operation, right? That column data will be automatically supplied by the entity framework, and the default value it is going to be set as 1, 1, right? This is the default behavior, and we already see this thing. So entity framework provides this database generated data annotation attribute, which is used to configure how the value of a property will be generated. We know if we make the primary key column, if we by default for the primary key column, right? And guys, remember one thing that also you need to remember. So you have a primary key, but that primary key is created, right, based on a single column or multiple column, right? If the primary key, if it is a composite, right, QMPO composite, then no identity. We have already discussed no identity. If the primary key created based on a single column, right, if it is not a composite primary key, then the identity is going to be generated. The identity is going to be generated with the default value 1, 1. Right, so you should know what is identity from SQL Server pointer. Identity means it is a auto incremented column. Identity means what? Simple sense, auto incremented. Auto incremented. Auto incremented means you insert one record, right? The value is going to be 1. Insert another record, right? You insert another record. That column value for the second record it is going to be 2. You insert another record, that column value is going to be 3. This 1, 2, 3 as a developer, right, as a programmer, we do not need to set. This value will be automatically generated and automatically inserted in the database column when we are performing some, when we are executing some insert operation. And this is happening in the case of a primary key if it is created based on a single column. But in the case of a composite primary key, no identity is going to be generated. No identity means what? No identity means what? The value we need to specify explicitly, right? But now what is my intention? I don't want to generate the primary key. I don't want to apply that identity on the primary key column. I want to apply the identity on a different column. Is that possible? Yes, that is possible. The second thing is that, right? The second thing is that I don't want to generate the auto-generated value for the key column. Can you restrict this? Yes, we can restrict this. I want to compute, if you know what is computed column in database, right? One column value will be computed dynamically and set that value dynamically. That is also possible. But that option is not possible with the entity framework code first approach. That is possible with your entity framework core and Blend API. That is what we are going to discuss when we will discuss entity framework core. So for now, these two options are available. If you want to, if you do not want that database to generate the value, then you can do this thing. If you want to set a particular row value to be inserted automatically, then that is also possible. How this is possible? This is possible by using database generated attribute. So entity framework provides database generated data annotation attribute, which is used to configure how the value of a property will be generated. The database generated attribute belongs to data annotation.schema and namespace. If you go to the definition, then you will see this. So what is database generated attribute? It's a class inherited from the attribute class. It is having one constructor, and that constructor is basically used to set the value of the database generation option. What is database generated option? Now this is a enum. And this enum, right, if you go to the definition of this enum, then you will see that this enum having three values, right? What are the values? The values is non, identity, and the computed. If you set the database option value to none, then if you do not want the database to generate a value, right, then you need to use this option, right? Well, what it means, so you generated the primary key. You generate the primary key column, and you don't want that you don't want the database should provide the primary key column value automatically. Rather, we need to provide the value explicitly. Then you need to decorate that primary key column with this non option. Database generated option identity means any column, any integral column you want to be generated automatically by the entity framework. It should not be the primary key column, because primary key column by default identity generated automatically. You set the primary column as none, or you don't want to generate the you don't want to make the primary column as identity column, rather a different column you want to make as identity column. That is possible by using the second option, right? And this computed means if you want the database to generate a value for a property when a row is inserted operated dynamically, then you need to use this option, right? So these are the three options, but with entity framework, these two options is work, but with entity framework first approach, this option is not work. We will see this when we will discuss entity framework, right? Now let us understand this database generated option dot non attribute, right? Let me copy this one, right? So if you go to the database generated option, then what this definition saying specifies how the database generated values for a property. For a particular property, how the database is going to generate the value, that what you can specify using this database generated attribute, right? So now if you know that so this class having one constructor, and this is one get accessor. This value basically is going to be set by the constructor, right? So whatever value you provide, that value is going to be set inside this bucket, right? Now if you go to the database generated option, then you will see that it is enum, and what this enum saying represents the pattern used to generate values for a property in the database. How the value is going to be generated in the database for a property, that options are going to be provided by this database generated option class. What is none? The database does not generate values. What is identity? The database generates value when a row is inserted. And what is computed? The database generates value when a row is inserted or updated. That means this identity is going to work only in the case of inserted, and this computed means whenever the row is inserted and updated, right, this computed column value will be computed and will be stored inside that column, right? This is similar to identity column, and this is similar to your computed column in SQL Server, right? So that is fine. Now what we need to do is we need to modify the model. So we need to modify the main method of our, right? So what we have said, okay, let me close this one. Let me go to, so now what option we have specified? Database generated option dot non. So non means, now do you think that the student ID column is going to contain the identity column? Guys, tell me. If I commented this, then identity column is going to be generated and database will insert the value automatically. But as I have specified this database generated option dot non on this student ID property, then what will happen? So what will happen means, in this case I didn't, so it will make this column as the primary key column, but it will make this column as the primary column in the database, but without identity. So in this case, it is not going to be your identity column, but it is going to be your primary column. That is 100% sure. So as it is not going to be your identity column, then as a user, as a developer, while creating the entity and while generating the insert statement, at that time we need to provide value explicitly for this column. So as of now, we never provide the student ID column values, right? Why? Because that is automatically generated. But in this case, the value is not going to be generated automatically. Why? We have set the option none. None means no database database is not going to generate the value for us. So as a developer, we need to provide the value explicitly. Now, if you see this main method, right? So here we are creating two student entity, one student entity with the value 101 and one student entity with the value 102. Now, important thing is that the student ID value must be unique. If you provide the same value, like if I am providing the same student ID again, then it is going to give me some exception. Why exception? Because this is the primary key column. Right? This is the primary key column, and in the table, the primary key should not have any duplicate values. And if you try to enter some duplicate values like this, then you will get the exception, right? Now, so as we have set the database generated option null, then it is mandatory to provide the student ID value explicitly, and that is what we are doing here. Now, run the application. Students added. Now, if you verify the student table, then you will see that this is going to be your primary key, student ID integer not null, but this is not the identity column, but now it is primary key. So this is going to be generated. Now, if you verify the database, then you will see that the two students records are going to be inserted into the database. Is that clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So now I'm going to show you the database generated option identity. So what exactly it means? It means if you want to make any column, any integral column as identity column, see again it's basically it depends on the database provider what you are using. If you are using SQL Server, then you know SQL Server means identity column should be created on integer data type. It might be possible that if you are using MySQL, right? In MySQL, you might the identity column concept is not there. Then in that case, some other options are there. In that case, it might be possible that you can make identity or auto-generated for any string data type. But for SQL Server, the identity column should be what I can say, the identity column should be a integral column. And another thing is that in SQL Server, a table can have only one identity column, right? Let us understand this with an example, right? So now what I'm trying to do is I'm just going to modify the student entity. So in this case, you can see I'm not making the student ID as identity column, rather I'm making the sequence number as identity column. So what will happen in this case, student ID is going to be created as the primary key column but without identity, and this sequence number is going to be generated as the primary key column. Sorry, it is not going to be a primary key column, but it is going to be a identity column. So in this case, for this sequence number, the value is going to be automatically generated, and for this student ID, we need to explicitly provide the values for this column, right? Now let us modify these things. Right. So you can see I'm providing the student ID, first name and last name value. Here also I'm providing student name, first name and last name column values, but I'm not providing the sequence number. Now if you run the application, then you will see that the sequence number is going to be automatically generated in the database, and the sequence number is going to be your identity column. Now if you verify the database, then you will see that still your what I can say, student ID is going to be your primary key and sequence number is not null, right? So this is the value we have not provided, but now if you check the database, the value is automatically generated by the database with the value 102. So this is 102, and the student ID we have specified the value explicitly, and this is the sequence number. Now if you verify the script, right, then let us verify the script and see where the identity is created, whether it is created on the primary key column or it is created on the sequence number column. So this is my identity column, sorry, this is my primary key column, because you can see primary key clustered index is applied on the student ID column, but if you check the sequence number, it is created as identity. So So it is not necessary that the primary key should contain the identity column. You can also set a different column as the identity column. How you can do this? By using the database generated option for identity enum value. Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. And the third option, it is not going to work with entity framework code first approach. Once we discuss the Fluent API and then we discuss. Give me 1 minute, guys. Okay, so we will discuss that later, right? So once we start into the framework code. So this is clear?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So the last piece, what we are going to discuss today is the timestamp. Anybody having any knowledge regarding concurrency issues in a SQL server? What are the different concurrency issues? What are the different transaction isolation levels? How you can manage the concurrency issues? What is that read? Non-repeatable read? Anybody having any issue? Any knowledge? Guys? So basically you have to learn those things, right? SQL servers. So you should know this thing from database, because if you do not know this thing, then it will be very difficult for you to understand the concept, right? Because I'm not going to explain the database part here. So this is completely .NET, means I'm only going to focus on .NET. Anything related to SQL Server, I only give you the basic information, but you have to understand this thing from database point of view. See, concurrency transaction, concurrency, data read, lost update, non-repeatable read, phantom read, snapshot isolation, read committed, right? All these things you should know. What is concurrency issues, right? What are the different types of concurrency issues? How you can overcome the concurrency issues? What are the different transaction isolation levels, right? You should know all this. If you do not know what is data read, lost update, non-repeatable read, phantom read, if you do not know what are these read uncommitted, read committed, read repeatable read, snapshot and serializable, then it is very difficult for you to write what I can say a good application software. Because see, if you are developing one application, don't think that one transaction is going to always going to be executed on the database. It might be possible that you have to allow multiple thousands, hundreds of transactions at the same time to access your database. If 1,000 transactions trying to insert, update, modify, delete the same data in the database table, right? Then it might be possible that there are some kind of concurrency issues, right? So one database transaction read the data, another database transaction update the data. Then the first transaction which reads the data, that data is not available in the database anymore, right? So so you need to understand how you can handle those things. And there is a issue called the concurrency problem, right? So concurrency problem means if two transactions trying to do some kind of update delete operation on the same data, then there might be some problem, and that problem is going to be called as concurrency problem, right? So what I can suggest is you can go and check this concurrency issues articles, right? Because otherwise it will be very difficult for you to understand this concept, right? So I'm putting the link on the chat window, so just copy the link and go and check this thing. So what we are going to discuss is timestamp. So the timestamp data annotation attribute, this is the last data annotation attribute in our entity framework approach. This timestamp data annotation attribute can only be applied once in an entity class to a byte array type property, right? So this attribute you can apply it only once in an entity. That means only one attribute, only on a single property you can apply this. You cannot apply this timestamp attribute on more than one property. Again, the property where you can apply this, that property type should be byte array. So byte array. So it can be applied to a byte array type properties. Integrate columns with the timestamp data type in the database, right? So in the database, so if you apply this timestamp, then in the database, it is going to create the database column as timestamp. So entity framework automatically uses this timestamp column in concurrency check on update statement in the database, right? So what it means while you are going to perform the update statement in the database, to handle the concurrency problem, the entity framework is going to use this timestamp column, right? So how it is going to use this timestamp column, how it is going to handle the concurrency issues, right? That is what we are going to discuss in detail. The timestamp attribute can only be applied to a property that is of a byte array. We have already mentioned this thing, byte array. It cannot be applied to other data type. If you go to the definition, then you will see. What is the definition saying? This is a class, and you can see it's a seal class. Seal class means you cannot override this class, right? And this class having a 0 argument constructor. Simply what you need to do, you need to decorate that class with, decorate this attribute class simply, nothing else. There is no more parameter and nothing is there to do. So using this timestamp attribute in entity framework is one of the ways to handle concurrency issues. Concurrency issues means that the concurrency issues arise when multiple users or multiple transactions attempt to update or delete the same row at the same time. You are having one student with the ID 1. So two transactions read the data. One transaction update the data. Another transaction trying to update the same data. So in that case, you might be face some concurrency issues, and that concurrency issues is going to handle in entity framework if you are having some column called timestamp. So we can handle this concurrency issues using the timestamp. Timestamp can also be referred as a row version, right? So if you are reading somewhere timestamp, if you are reading somewhere row version, then don't be confused. They are just synonyms to each other. So what is timestamp? Let me give you some brief, some little information from the SQL Server point. So in SQL Server, row version and timestamps are synonymous. Row version is available since SQL Server 2005, while timestamp is deprecated and will be removed in future version of SQL Server. Currently, this is not removed, but in near future it might be removed. Right, so what is this row version or timestamp? It is an incrementing 8-byte binary number. So it is an incrementing 8-byte binary number. So why I'm taking an so why it is only applicable to a byte array? Because of this. Because this row version of timestamp, what I'm showing, it is nothing but it's a value. It's an incrementing 8-byte binary number, and it doesn't store. But see, by looking at this timestamp, don't be confused that it is going to store any datetime related information. It is not going to store datetime related information. To store datetime related information, you need to use datetime data type, not the timestamp. So timestamp means it is going to store a 8-byte binary number, right? In SQL Server, row version or timestamp data type represent automatically generated binary number unique within the database. If we, and guys, only a table can have only one column, either with row version data type or timestamp data type. You cannot create a 2 column with the timestamp data type or row version data type. So you have to create, you only have one column with row version or timestamp data type, and that column is automatically generated by the that column value is automatically generated by the SQL Server database, and that value is going to be unique within the database. You cannot find two values same in the database. Suppose you are having two tables. Suppose you are having okay, let me explain. Table 1 table 2, and this is table 3. So suppose here the row version number, some the format is something like 0 into 000, let's say db1, right? And you insert one row, the value is like this. You insert another row, here the value is going to be 2. Insert another row, here the value is going to be 3. You insert another row, the value is going to be 4 here. That means this row version value is going to be unique throughout the database, right? And again, suppose you are having another table 4, right? So if table 4, and if this table doesn't have the row number column, or table doesn't have any column with timestamp and a row version data type, then this value will not be created there. It is only going to be created if your table contains the column with the row number or timestamp data type, right? So if a table contains a row number or timestamp column, anytime a new row is inserted or any existing row is updated, the value of the row version column is said to be current, right? So what it means you have inserted this column, right? Let me delete this one. Now you updated this column. Once you update this row, right? Once you update this row, means what? Means this row number is updated. What is the latest one? 4. So it is going to update with 5. Then you update this row, this value is going to be 6, right? What it means, now whenever you inserted or whenever you updated any row in the database table, then the value is going to be updated, right? It is not going to contain the same value like the identity column, right? In identity column, the value is automatically generated, but that value cannot be changed. But in this case, the row number value is automatically generated, but that value is going to be also updated when you perform the update operation on that particular row. Clear, guys?
Yes, sir.
Right? And also, see, in this case, you are performing the update operation. Even if that update operation doesn't affect any data in this particular row, then also this value is also going to be updated. It doesn't matter. You perform one update operation on a particular row, it might be affected that row or not. Any data in that particular, any column data in that row might be changed or not. That doesn't matter. But you perform the update operation means this value is going to be updated with the latest value. So in a database, this row number is going to be uniquely identify each record. So it should behave like a integrity, right? So you can uniquely identify each row based on this, right? Let us try to understand this thing, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to update the student model class, right? So I'm going to update the student model class. So here you can see this is student ID, first name, last name. This is going to be my primary key column as well as identity column, and this is going to be my row version column. We cannot have more than one column with the timestamp attribute. One table can have only one timestamp column. So in this case, my row version, this is my column, this is going to be column name. As I mentioned, you can apply the timestamp attribute only the byte array. So here the data type is going to be byte array, and I'm applying this timestamp attribute. So this is the first thing. And the second thing is that what we need to do is we need to update the data. So right, we need to add some data into the database, right? So I'm creating two students, student 1 and student 2, and then I'm calling the set changes method, right? So in this case, what will happen? 2 records are going to be inserted into the database, right? Let me run this application and show you the data. So in this case, and as I mentioned, row version means it is automatical. The value for this column is automatically generated by the database, right? So in this case, you can see I'm not passing any value for the row version column, but that value is going to be automatically generated. Now let me go to the database, refresh the database. Right now, let me open the student table and run the application. Right, so you can see this is my entity 1, this is my entity 2. So the row version 8-byte binary number, this is 71, This is 72. So automatically sequentially incremental number. So this is row version. This is how the row version going to be stored in the database. So if you want to manage concurrency, how to manage that, what I will show you later. But to manage concurrency, so in entity framework, you should have this row version. Clear, guys? How the row version looks like and how the data is going to be stored, and at what format the data is going to be stored. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now this is fine, right? So what will happen? So you will see this row version is so here we mentioned byte in previously it will created as var binary, but as we have specified the timestamp, then the data type of this column is going to be timestamp and not null. Not null, why? Because you cannot make this column as empty. By default, in the database is going to store the data into this column, right? So timestamp, the format is like this, automatically generated, sequential increment number 71, then it is going to be 72. The data is like this. The timestamp column will be included in the where clause whenever you update an entity and call the save changes method. What it means? Let us understand this. Okay. So the timestamp or what column, the timestamp column what you specified, right? That is going to be included in the where clause whenever you perform an update operation, right? So in this case, fetch the student detail whose ID is 1. So you know what is the use of this find method. To this find method, we need to provide the primary key column value, and based on the primary key column value, it will fetch that detail. So currently in our application, we are having two students, student ID 1 and student ID 2. So here I'm passing 1. So I'm fetching the student whose ID is 1. Right, so you know what is the meaning of this statement. So can anybody tell me what is this statement is all about? Context dot database dot log equals to console dot write.
It will show the generated SQL statement.
Okay, so whatever the SQL statement is generated and executed by entity framework on the database, that SQL statement it is going to print at the console window. So I just want to make sure how the row version column is going to be used in the case of update string. Right here, I'm updating the first name column value. Here I'm updating the last name column value, and then I'm calling this save changes. So if you do not have the row number column, then what generally SQL what entity framework generally do is, based on the primary key column value, it is going to update those columns which are modified. In this case, first column is modified, second last name column is modified. So in the update statement, these two columns are included, and in the where clause condition, it will use the student ID column. But the beautifulness of entity framework is that in our table, not only the primary key column student ID is there, row version is also there. So as row version is there, so now whenever you fetch the data, you do not have not only the row ID, not only the student ID, but also the row version value is also there right now. So what you will do is, you will generate the update statement, and in the where clause condition, not only it will use the student ID to update the data, but also it will include that row number row version column in the where clause while updating the data. Let me run the application and show you the data. Right, let me write. So you can see update first name with this parameter, last name with this parameter, what is 00, first name update, what is 01, last name update, what is 02, that is 1, and what is 02, system dot byte array. So in first name updated will be set. In the last name 01 parameter is last name updated. Student ID value is 02. So 02 means what value? 1. And the row version means it's a byte array. So 03, what is the value of 03? System dot byte array. So you can see in the where clause condition, it is not only using, right, the student ID, but also it is using the row version while updating the data. Clear? Why it is using the row version to update the data? Because to handle the concurrency issue. The next example what we are going to discuss related to concurrency issues, but before that you need to understand this text, right? What is the use of row version, right? So while updating the data, it is going to use the row version. Now just tell me, if you want in this update statement, you are fetching the row number value as this one, right? If someone change this value, if some other transaction modify this value to 75, this update statement is going to work or it is going to fail?
It will fail.
Why fail? Because in the where condition, the student ID equals to value 1 is available, row version currently he is comparing with this value 71, but in the database this 71 is not available, so it will fail the transaction. This is how it is going to maintain the concurrency issues, right? Now you can say while performing the update operation, that row number column will also come into the picture and will be used in the where clause like this, right? Clear, guys?
Yes.
Right. So this is how row number function is called. Now see, in this case 71, as we have updated this column value, we have updated this entity student ID 1. After the updation operation is successful, this row number version, this column value is going to be updated or not? So this row version not only included, not only this value, the column value is not only for insert statement but also for update statement. When you are inserting, the value will automatically generated and inserted, and when you are updating, that column value is also automatically generated and updated. So in this case, that value, right, what is the, say 71, 72, what is the next incremental value for row version on this database? 70. Guys, tell me, 70. What is the next value? What should be 73. So if our understanding is fine, right? Now if I execute this select statement, then it should make this column value as 73, because not only row version is going to be generated in the case of an insert statement, but also in the case of an update statement, right? Now if I execute this statement, then you will see that the value is updated to 73 or not?
Yes.
Right? So this is how the row number function is going to work. Now we are going to understand how we can maintain or how we can handle the concurrency issues in entity frame, right? So for that purpose, I'm going to use two methods, right? So I'm going to use method 1 and method 2, right? So I'm going to create two threads. Thread 1 is going to execute method 1. Thread 2 is going to execute method 2. I'm starting thread 1. I'm also starting thread 2. I'm making wait this main method to complete thread 1 and 3 execution. And once that execution completed, I'm putting this main method completed, right? And if anything goes wrong, if any exception occurred, then the catch block is going to be executed, right? And what I'm doing in the method 1. So in method 1, I'm fetching the student's entity whose ID is 1. I'm making the thread to sleep for 2 seconds. And then I'm making the first name to be updated by method 1. Second, last name to be updated by method 1. So I'm just doing some value changes in the first name and last name. So whatever the value plus method 1, whatever the value plus method 1. And then I'm calling the set changes method and printing student updated by method 1. And what I'm doing in method 2, I'm also going to do the same. That means I'm fetching the same student details. I'm making the thread to sleep for 2 seconds. And here I'm making method 2 and method 2, updating the first name, last name, whatever the value with method 2 and method 2, and calling the set changes. So in this case, when this statement is executed, right? So it will fetch this first name updated and last name updated value with this row number version. Yes or no? At this time,
Yes.
what should be the value? The value should be this one. Yes or no?
Yes.
right? And in this case, right, so in this case also the value is going to be same or different. The value is also
Same.
going to be same in this case also or different?
Same.
Same. That means the row version number is this one and the value is this one. Now I'm making this thread to sleep 2 seconds to make sure both the thread are started. So here the thread 1 started, the thread sleep for 2 seconds. Here once this thread is in sleep mode, the second thread is also started and the second thread is also sleep for 2 seconds. Now this thread wake up and you will continue executing. So in this case, once the thread wake up and continue executing, right, so he will updated the first name and last name value, right? What should be the first name value? First name updated method 1, last name updated method 1. Yes or no?
Yes.
And then he called the save changes method. Once he called the save changes method, then what will happen? So once the save changes method execution is completed, then this value will be updated into the database and what will become this one? 74. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Right. Now coming to this part. So what he will do? Again, this method already read this data. Now he is updating this data, right? Updating this data, first name updated, right? So let me copy this one. So the data is updated like this or not?
Yes.
Now he is going to call the save changes method. If this save changes method work perfectly, then this updation is going to store the data which is a dummy data. Why? Because already one transaction updated the data as first name updated method 1. Then if I'm adding this method 2, then the value should be not like the value should be not this one, the actual value should be this one. Yes or no? Because that is already updated by one transaction. Then the value should be this one. But this value is not with this transaction. In this transaction, the value is going to be this one. If it successfully update this value, then that means what? Whatever the modification done by this transaction, those are going to be lost or not?
Yes.
Right? So we need to avoid. So this is nothing but your concurrency issue. We need to avoid this one. Right? But in this case, while it is going to update the data, right, in the where clause condition, it is going to use what? This row version number. In the where clause, it is going to use this row version. But this row version is available in the database anymore? Yeah, which is already updated by the first transaction. In the database, you do not have this is 73. In the database, we are having 74. And here we are trying to update the database table with student ID is 1 using this row number version, row version column value, which is not available anymore. So in this case, this transaction is going to be held and this transaction is going to be success. It might be possible that this transaction success and this transaction failed, or this transaction success and this transaction failed. Clear?
Yes.
Right. Now if you run the application, then you will see that one transaction is going to fail, right, and another is going to be successful. The main method started and then you will see some kind of a exception, right? So main method started, you can see student updated by method 1 means method 2 is going to be. So what issue it is? DB update concurrency exception. So this is how you can handle the concurrency issues. Now if you go to the database, then you will see that this is going to be updated as 74. This is how you handle the concurrency issues in .NET Framework using the timestamp. Clear, guys?
Yes.
So this is all about our data annotation attribute. Next, we are going to start Fluent API. So whatever the things we have so far done using data annotation attribute, the same thing and many more things we can achieve using the Fluent API, and that is what we are going to discuss next. Any question from anyone?
No.
Okay. That's it. Thank you, guys. And guys, please practice it, because without practice, these things look simple, but until and unless you are not doing practice, these things will later it will make you very difficult to understand. Right?
Sir,
Yes.
still how many topics pending, sir? Here?
How many means related to entity framework or all?
All.
All means entity framework. I'm trying to complete this week. Once entity framework is completed, then I'm going to start a lane queue, right? After lane queue, I'm going to start automapper. After automapper, I'm going to start file handling, and after file handling, I'm going to start solid principle, then design patterns, and then I'm going to discuss if anything is missing, like new features, like the .NET framework architecture, like this.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
But first of all, whatever the important things that what we are planning to cover first, right? Important things like a link queue, which is very important, automapper, which is very important, file handling is also important, design patterns are important, right? Solid principles are important. Those things we will cover first, and last I will start the discussing the new features, right? Which is not that difficult. If you understand this concept, new feature you can easily understand.
Okay,
Okay,
sir.
any question? Okay, any question from anyone? Okay, thank you, guys.